welcome to my Rolling Magma Sire of Shards build guide. I'm trying to keep this short. First I'm going to explain Sire of Shards, the interaction with Magma Orb, then I'm going to talk about the Ascendancy, the skill tree, and in the end I will talk about the gear and talk about how much currency I invested approximately. And yeah, let's do this. Rolling Magma is a skill that fires a magma ball, and each time the ball bounces, it does damage. The projectile passing through enemies does not do damage, only the bounce. So maybe you can see the red circle appearing after the projectile hits the ground. This is what does the damage. So if we were to use this in a normal caster channeling setup, it looks a bit like this. And it works, but the coverage is just not there, it's not great. This is where Sire of Shards comes in. Sire of Shards is a unique staff, and socketed gems gain 4 additional projectiles, which is great, and also the projectiles are fired in a circle. So if we look at my main skill, socketed into Sire of Shards, if you look at the red circles on the ground, we basically cover the whole screen and do AoE damage to all enemies. For our main skill, Rolling Magma, try to get the level 21 gem, not only because of the extra damage, but because we get 1 additional chain. And our supports are Awakened Cast while Channeling, Cyclone level 1 to keep the mana cost slow, Awakened Elemental Focus support, Slower Projectiles support. Slower Projectiles is actually interesting, just because I'm using a Gloomfang, and Gloomfang gives us increased projectile speed, and we don't really want that. If we look at our sample Rolling Magma right here, the projectiles just bounce a bit too fast, so we don't get full coverage on the ground. But if we take slow projectile support, everything bounces nice and slow and everything gets covered. So I really like the slow projectile support, at least as long as I'm using Gloomfang. And then inspiration support to keep the mana costs of our skill low, and it's 25% increased elemental damage anyway, so pretty nice. And that's our main skill. Movement skill is Frostblink. I like Frostblink because it doesn't stop the channeling of Cyclone, and our auras are Anger, which is just flat fire damage, Clarity, which gives us mana regen and is pretty important for a Watcher's Eye mod, I will mention later, and Herald of Ash is more fire damage and it gives us those nice explosions all around, so it's great for clear. And I have an Enlightened support, but it's not necessary. As you can see, my auras are all activated. Just if someone checks out the POV and thinks this is mandatory, it is not, I just dropped it. And then Flame War is also interesting. I'm experimenting with this. Flame War gives projectiles that pass through it extra fire damage, and it also works with Rolling Magma. It's a bit hard to see, but the projectiles get a fire effect when they pass through it. And last but not least, Cast on Death Portal. Our build is pretty squishy, we don't have great defenses, we have a little bit of dodge, but that's it. Our main defense is running around with Cyclone and blowing stuff up, and sometimes we just get one shot. Okay, let's have a look at our Ascendancy and our skill tree. I'm using the Deadeye Ascendancy because of the extra chain and the 2 additional projectiles. I'm using this build as a clear build, and 2 projectiles and 1 additional chain is just excellent for clearing. Sadly, the projectiles have 30% chance to be able to chain when colliding with terrain. Does not work with Magma Orb, because Magma Orb cannot change directions. This would be godlike in closed quarters, but sadly it doesn't work. The Magma Orb just disappears when colliding with a war. Tailwind is pretty nice to have. And the last point is Focal Point. 70% increased effect of your marks is pretty insane. So I'm not using it right now. I would have to equip a Hunter chest to get an additional curse, but against bosses you would deal up to, I think, 40 or 50% more damage with Sniper's Mark. So if you're having trouble killing bosses, this could really be a turning point. We have a look at our skill tree. It's just 3 voices connected with each other. In the end, we take Elemental Overload for 40% more elemental damage, and we take every life node and every jewel socket we can get along the way. The jewels are mostly using, like this one, increased maximum life, increased fire damage, and increased projectile damage. They were fairly cheap. I think if we check this, yeah, they start at 3 chaos and then they go up and up, but they're fairly cheap, even with a perfect life roll. The cluster jewels I'm using are the second worst voices. They are fairly cheap right now, I think. Yeah, they're like 14 chaos and the price is dropping. I bought them for 20 back then. And the reason for this is I'm stacking these medium cluster jewels. They all have follow through, and follow through gives us 15% increased damage for each remaining chain, which means our magma orb bounces 7 times. So the first hit does 7 times 15 increased damage, and we have 9 of these jewels, so the closer the enemy is, the more damage the enemy takes. And on top of that, we have eye to eye, which means enemies in close proximity to us, again, we deal 60% increased damage against them again. So with all of this combined, the first hit of the magma orb does, I think, 1500 increased damage. So enemies close to us take a lot of damage, and then slowly the damage gets lower. And so we are kind of this safe space of destruction, and we are not incredibly safe. We will still get one shot from time to time, but the closer the enemies are, the more damage they take. And the only exception is this Megalomaniac I bought for 1x. It also has follow through, but it also has Master of Fire, which gives us, not us, but the enemies around us, it gives them fire exposure. And yeah, the rare jewels are basically all the same, life and damage, and the exceptions are here. I'm using a Replica Conqueror's Efficiency. The only interesting thing about this is the -1 to total mana costs. And then the Watchers I am using is, again, it has a Clarity mod, which gives -10 to total mana costs. And then I have fire damage penetrates, 10% of fire resistance while affected by anger. I think I paid 3 Exalt for this combination, but if you just want to be comfortable and don't have to use a mana flask, just the Clarity mod is enough. I think the Clarity mod is also fairly cheap. Yeah, it's about 100 chaos, and if we take the damage mod, yeah, it gets more expensive. Okay, let's quickly talk about Magia, and I will give you a rough estimate of how much I think this is worth or how much I paid for it. The Sire of Shards, I paid 50 chaos for this one, but it has a nice crangle on it with damage penetrates 7% of fire resistance. To get a 6 linked, I think you just pay 30 chaos if you want the normal one 6 linked. Then the Helm enchant, we really want the rolling magma chains an additional time. This is also very cheap. I just got mine on a very nice base. Paid 20 chaos for it, and then used some harvest crafting spam to get some nice resists, and crafted some life on it. The Gloomfang was more expensive than the usual Gloomfang because it was almost perfectly rolled. You really want the perfect roll on the projectiles that have chained gain 35% of non-chaos damage as extra chaos damage. This means that after the first bounce, we gain additional, in my case, 42% of non-chaos damage as chaos damage, which is a huge damage increased after the first bounce. Yeah, you really want the perfect roll on this, and then you use some chaos catalysts to increase this modifier. And the downside of Gloomfang, of course, is that in my case, for example, I lose 13 life for each enemy that is hit by my spares. So to counteract this, I have to use a Shaper Ring, which gives me 15 life for each enemy hit by my spares. So it all balances out, and I think I paid about 100 chaos for this ring. And then I have a Curse Ring with Elemental Weakness, and again I paid about 100 chaos for that one because it has a nice life roll on it. And my gloves, they were fairly expensive just for the base. I paid for some synthesis gloves, I paid 2x, and then I harvest crafted some nice life and resist on them. The belt was super cheap. I paid 5 chaos for this belt just to get a lot of life and get the resistances I needed. And the Stampede are really important because they make the speed more safe and more enjoyable. So normally when you run and then you cyclone, you normally slow down, but the Stampede sets your base movement speed to 150%, so it doesn't matter if you use cyclone or if you run, you're always the same speed. If I, for example, change the boots, you notice I run about the same speed, but when I cyclone, I'm really, really slow. So Stampede, pretty important. And for the flasks, I have an instant life flask, an enduring mana flask, just in case I want to run a no region map, Aetheri's Promise, Dying Sun, and the Wise Oak. All these unique flasks are pretty cheap right now. They're probably between 20 or 5 chaos. And yeah, that's about it. Please remember, this is a mapping build, this is not a boss killer. I actually managed to kill a few of the conquerors with it, just for fun, but against some boss fights, you're just not equipped to fight them. And yeah, that's about it. I hope you liked it, I hope it was informative, and have a nice day, goodbye.